All right, AP World. This is my safety video here to cover the last of everything that we need to cover for Unit 7. We'll see what we do in class, and then depending on what we do in class, you can kind of like fast forward to where we leave off so that you can finish up everything else. Okay, so we finished up in class with everything kind of going wrong for Germany, everything going right for the Allies. As far as the European theater of the war goes. So, we have Italy playing less of a role in the war, and we have on the Eastern Front, we have Soviet forces pushing Germans across out of their country, across Eastern Europe, and pretty much right up to the borders of Germany. And then in Western Europe, you have American, British, and Canadian forces kind of doing the same, basically pushing the Germans up pretty darn close to their border there. We finish off with that last gasp from Hitler, at least in the West, to try to hold off the inevitable that does not succeed for him. Okay. Also going on at the same time as that, as early as about 1942, the British on their own at first started some bombing campaigns over Germany, sending some of their big bombers that they had. Once we were in the war and had significant numbers of our air forces moving over to Europe, stationed out of England, we started doing the same thing. And by the end of 1943, we pretty much have things worked out where the Americans bomb during the day and the British bomb at night. So we're doing this round the clock bombing campaign. And first we aim at destroying German industrial sites to try to cripple their ability to create more war material that they need, the weapons and vehicles and all that sort of thing. But we do make a shift on that as the war goes on, and we begin to bomb German cities that really don't have any industrial or military value, but are full of Germans. And with the idea being that kind of a miniature, or not miniature, a much enlarged version of what Germany was trying to do with Great Britain there early on in the war. And that is to, drop enough bombs to where the people just can't put up with it anymore and either demand their government to end the war or overthrow their government so that the war, and to try to create some kind of drastic change that way. And it'll be yet another example of what a lot of military historians especially will tell you, is that in the end, if you're trying to defeat a stubborn enemy, you can't do it just from the air. It always still requires there to be soldiers on the ground doing the dirty work down there. And so the Allies will, you could definitely argue that their bombing campaigns probably played some role in shortening the war, but at a high cost. And we'll talk about that in the very last section. Okay, so by the time we get into the spring of 1945, you have the Soviet Union now in Germany and its forces, its armies marching into Berlin. You have American, British, Canadians coming in from the western part of Germany. They are completely surrounded. And once the Soviet Union does get into the city of Berlin itself, Hitler and the other top Nazis, they are ensconced down below in a massive bunker in the heart of Berlin, in the government sector of Berlin. Hitler already knows what has happened to his old buddy Mussolini, who just about a week or so before all this ends up being captured by Italian partisans and executed. Just put him up against a wall along with some of the other people he was captured with, and machine gun them all to death. And then they haul their bodies to a nearby city and they string them up by their heels so that the Italian people can take out their rage on this guy that has brought nothing but destruction and death and suffering to their country. And Hitler learns about this, quite possibly see some of the pictures or newsreels of it. You can look that up on your own. It's pretty gruesome. He pretty much kind of turned Mussolini and these other people into, I don't know, kind of human pinatas. I don't know how else to describe it. Yeah, it's ugly stuff. So Hitler does not have any intention of letting that happen to him. He, knowing that there's no way out, um, marries his longtime mistress Eva Braun, and for their honeymoon, he gives her a cyanide tablet. The romantic, and they kill themselves. Hitler shoots himself, and Eva Braun poisons herself. And they spend from there they end up in a little ditch that they drag them out from the bunker and pour gasoline over them and light them up. All right, and that is how Adolf Hitler meets his end. With Hitler dead, the remaining German leadership immediately turns their attention to surrendering, negotiating briefly with the Allies. Actually, there is no negotiation. The surrender will be unconditional, which means there's no give and take. You are beat, and you're done. And the German leadership signs off on that on May 8th, what comes to be known as Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. A day that's still celebrated in some countries back over in Europe, but one that we've kind of let go of over here in the States. Okay, and that brings the war in Europe to a conclusion. And yes, there's all kinds of celebrating, but it can't be too crazy because everyone knows there's still a whole other war going on the other side. And over there on the other side in the Pacific, by the time we're getting into the spring of 1945, things are beginning to unravel for Japan as well. Two major islands that are attacked by the United States and conquered at high cost again. American troops, the islands of Iwo Jima and then Okinawa. Okinawa is an important one to the Japanese because that is actually technically what they consider to be part of the island chain that makes up Japan. So this is the first of, first territory within their very direct, what they view as their country. That is now being attacked by the United States. Anyhow, picture off to the right, you see the famous raising of the flag on Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima, one of the more iconic scenes from World War II. And over on the left side, you see a picture of a kamikaze plane crashing into an American ship. The kamikaze, yet another sign of what we face when we have to invade Japan proper. As the Japanese volunteer themselves to fly these planes into American ships and basically, turning themselves into, pretty big suicide bombers. And kamikaze, word means divine wind, goes back to the wind that saved Japan from the Mongols way back there in earlier times. This is again another sign for our government, our military leadership, as to what we are going to face when we have to invade Japan. It is a very daunting proposition. While we are doing that, we also start a major bombing campaign of Japan. For the longest time, we can't do it because we don't have any air bases close enough to attack Japan, and you can't fly bombers off of aircraft carriers, only small planes. Well, now with Iwo Jima, and actually with some of the islands we'd even captured before there, we now can build our own air bases, and we start flying planes and bombing again. Same pattern as with Germany, industrial sites, military sites. But when that doesn't work, boom, you start bombing their big cities. Tokyo being the chief target. And firebombing is the use of what are called incendiary bombs. And these are bombs that are designed not to make big, giant, ugly explosions like we usually think of bombs, but actually they're more designed to set fires, to start fires blazing. And the sad reality is most of the buildings, especially the residences of Tokyo that people live in, massive population, most of them are wood, and is the perfect tinder, fuel for a fire. And like what happens in a couple instances in Germany, the bombing of Tokyo results in these firestorms that take place, and end up with 100,000 plus civilian deaths. These are a lot of them what we call non-combatants. They're not soldiers. They're people who have maybe other involvement in the war, but a lot of them are civilians. Families, women, children, old people, babies, all of that. But again, this is the pressure we are trying to put to get the Japanese to just surrender. Okay. When we get down to number 10, Harry Truman, by this point, is president. Franklin Roosevelt dies of a stroke in April of 1945, and Truman is brought on board. He is his vice president and moves up into the presidency. And one of the very first decisions he has to make is one I wouldn't want to have to make myself. He is being presented with a draft of plans for a land invasion of Japan. The U.S. military is estimating that we could lose upwards of 1 million soldiers killed, wounded in trying to conquer Japan. We have intelligence telling us that that even young children are being trained to how to roll under enemy tanks and then to detonate little explosive vests that they're wearing and turning themselves into bombs. They know that the potentially they're looking at an entire population that is going to commit suicide in effect rather than be captured in a war. And so when Truman is made aware of the Manhattan Project, and this is so secret, he didn't even know it as vice president. He is introduced to it when he's sworn in and told that this project has created a bomb unlike anything the world has seen, using the power of atomic energy. And so he is given the decision to whether to use it or not. And with the idea of those estimates for U.S. casualties, he gives the go-ahead. And that results in, first, the bombing of the Japanese city of Hiroshima. When the Japanese government does not respond to a demand to surrender after that bombing, a second bomb is dropped on the city of Nagasaki. And between the two, you're going to end up with about 145 dead and many, you can probably almost triple or quadruple that in terms of the number of wounded. Those who will die later on because of radiation poisoning, things like that. But the second bomb finally gets the attention of the Japanese government. They don't know. It's just the start of a process of bombing every major city in Japan out of existence. And the government finally says, we're ready to talk about surrender. Sorry, I'm so stuffed up tonight. And it's a good thing they asked for surrender at that point, because we didn't have a third bomb ready to go. They were building these bombs as fast as they could. But in August of 1945, those were the two we had available. Those were the two that were used. So Japan surrenders on August 14th. I think that is made official on September 2nd of 1945, and that is then declared as VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day, and that finally brings World War II to a close. Okay, your consequences. Holy cow! Almost 3 times as many dead in World War I, and World War I already was pretty dramatic in that when you look at the 25 to 35 million deaths in World War I, it was divided almost right down the middle between soldiers and civilians. And there had never been a war like that had resulted in the death of so many civilians. World War II tops it. You got the stat there. Okay, 2/3 of 2 out of. Oh, sorry, my alarm's telling me it's time to go to bed, but I'm not. Two out of every 3 people who die in World War II is a non-combatant. It's a civilian. And so that is a pretty staggering one there. My little chart over on the side is teeny tiny. I'm sorry. But what it shows you is the incredibly heavy toll, that the Soviet Union suffers in this war. I think estimates run around 22 to 27 million people in the Soviet Union die. And remember this when we get to the Cold War, okay? When you look at the other deaths, I mean, Germany obviously suffers fighting that 2-front war and then ultimately, defeat. You see where Japan lands on that chart. You see where China, another country that suffered heavily. But then you look at others. You look at us. I mean, we're just like a little blip, right there. And so remember those things, okay? The countries that suffered heavily, the countries that did not, because it is going to influence events after World War II, all right? Another consequence of World War II is the entire political landscape of the world has changed. Going into World War II, they were kind of wounded from World War I, but the old powers were still the old powers. Western European countries and, that sort of thing. They they have been weakened now to a point that it's going to take them years to recover from. And this is also going to be the beginning of the end of their empires. And so we're going to have two new countries that are going to be at the fore. And even though the Soviet Union suffers as badly as they do in World War II, you're still going to see them show up on the scene. And this term superpower is going to be a new term to describe us in the Soviet Union. And with World War II coming to an end, the alliance, you really had always been a rather frail alliance, comes apart. And very quickly, we are going to be going from being allies to enemies, all right? And which will be the story of Unit 8. And so there we go. There is all of that. And this is the point where in Unit 7, where I always feel like I'd say, and that's it, we're done, gang. But no, we have to get to the last section, all right? Section 8, Mass Atrocities After 1900. Such an uplifting way to wrap things up here. But here we go, okay? So atrocities, the way we're going to define atrocities is when you have acts of violence, acts of extreme cruelty, that usually happen during time of war. And examples of atrocities are going to be genocide, which is, the killing of mass numbers of people, usually for something that, not because of something that they've done, but because of who they are, what their race is, what their religion is, what their ethnicity is, things like that. Okay. Mass murder would be an example of atrocities. Ethnic violence. Okay. Whether it's religion on a religion, different cultural designations, or, any of that falls into the definition of what we refer to as an atrocity. And we're going to definitely see, in World War II, we saw just a ton of these, but we're going to take a look at kind of the history of it going all the way back you got it all defined there, okay? But the way this plays out before World War One, I guess say World War II. Sorry, that's the way they have that organized here, and then a little bit of even wrapping up after World War II. Okay, so there you go. You've got it defined. Okay, so some of the pre-World War II mass atrocities the Culture Board would like you to know would first of all be genocide that takes place in Turkey about the time of the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. Armenians, I would call them an ethnic group within the Ottoman Empire who had oftentimes suffered a lot of discrimination by the Ottomans, and that continues with the Ottoman Empire becoming Turkey. And a lot of this, they are a minority, and they suffer heavily as a result of that. The Turkish government to this day refuses to acknowledge that this is a genocide. Pretty much all the rest of the world says, "Yeah, guys, it's a genocide." Okay, and through the course of it, you got the numbers there, the number of Armenians who end up dying. All right, so you have that takes place. You have the Holodomor. Holodomor, I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is an atrocity that takes place in Ukraine, and yet is another echo of the current conflict between Ukraine and Russia. We talked about that collectivization under Stalin. This is a direct consequence of that. Okay, and Holodomor, I think it's Ukrainian, and I think if you break the word up, it pretty much means death by starvation. And so remember that collectivization, the government taking over the farms, farmers resisting it. It triggers just massive famines. Okay, 10 million deaths. Some estimate even higher than that. They're going to die in the 1930s in Ukraine, and they are going to, by and large, Ukrainians will hold, the Russians of the Soviet Union responsible for that. And is the background to the friction between those two that continues right on up into the war that started, one back in 2015, and the more recent war here that started in 2022. Okay, and so another example there of an atrocity before World War II. Let's see. During World War II, here we go. The Holocaust is probably the main one you want to know about. And we've kind of mentioned a little bit about this. I'll give you the quick rundown here, okay? It is all rooted in the beliefs of the Nazis that Adolf Hitler pretty much kind of encapsulated, extreme anti-Semitism. Deadly anti-Semitism. We learned about in this class already that Jews, because they were always a minority, always, living amongst, large populations of Christians, had for centuries had suffered various levels of discrimination, and there had been outbursts of violence against Jews, where they'd either been pushed out of different towns, cities, even countries in the past, and sometimes rounded up and killed, but nothing on the scale of what the Nazis are going to do. And a lot of this does tie back to the Nazis and their vision of this Aryan master race, their idea of what they see over on the left side there is the perfect German, which always still kind of blows my mind because Adolf Hitler doesn't look like any of those people, but oh well. And then the caricature that they oftentimes create of of what they view Jews as looking like, and just all these distorted features to make these people always look like they're some kind of monsters or some kind of vagrants or something. Okay, so it's all tied up in that, and we talked about those Nuremberg laws that are passed shortly after Hitler seizes power. After the death of Hindenburg, and he declares himself Führer. And, as I mentioned, I don't need to go into it deeply here, but the whole purpose of those Nuremberg laws that you see all kind of, this is kind of giving you the display of, some of their laws about intermarriage between Germans and Jews, or what they would call, Aryans and Jews, and what was allowable, how much blood you could have in you that might still be Jewish and you'd still be considered German. But then where is that crossover where you've got too much Jewish blood in you? So boom, now you're a Jew. It's that sort of thing. And remember that the other purpose of those Nuremberg laws, besides defining what a Jew was in German society, it was also about marginalizing the role of Jews in German society, in the professional world, and just their culture altogether. And telling Jews where they could work and where they couldn't work, and it was all about putting pressure on them. Maybe they'll move out. If they can't move out, then then they know that their world is shrinking, and on purpose and by decree of law. Okay, once the war breaks out. The Nazis do start building some concentration camps even before World War II breaks out, but most of them are being built to house political prisoners, mental patients, things like that. The roundup of Jews, gypsies, other groups that they view, homosexuals. It's a long list, folks. People who even, there's Catholics in some cases that are rounded up who refuse to support the war and that sort of a deal. So, it is a wide net. I know a lot of people usually just equate, well, it was Jews, but there's going to be many others who get caught up in this, okay? Prisoners of war at times. The list goes on and on. And by the time World War II is up and running, the Germans are beginning to work on this network of not just concentration camps where people are working, producing, war material, things like that for the Germans. But then they also start producing these death camps like Auschwitz, places like Treblinka, whose really intended purpose is that to industrialize mass killing, where they could be killing and disposing of tens of thousands of people per day. Okay, and so you got a couple of illustrations there. Those of you that read Night, God, it's teeny tiny. It's really hard to tell in this picture. That's Elie Wiesel right there. He was taking a picture of when they came into the camps to liberate them. Anyhow, that's the story with those. Okay, and they operate those right up to the bitter end, folks. Some historians have pointed out that Hitler and the Nazis were so obsessed with the Holocaust that they cost themselves potentially on the battlefield. by steering a lot of their men that could have been on the front fighting against the Soviets and the Western Allies were instead working in those camps and making sure that the goal of killing every last Jew in Europe, was achieved. They made it about halfway there. They killed about half the Jews of Europe. And so, the number that usually is attributed to the Jews themselves is about 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust, and about 6 million people of other, categories that are also killed. Okay, moving on to the Japanese. I mentioned to you before, the Japanese also kind of they didn't call it a master race, but they also saw themselves as superior to other Asians, and that is going to definitely act out in the way that they treat them. Remember the Japanese we talked about, they have that kind of a twisted code of honor. Where they will not consider surrender. They have zero respect for enemies that surrender to them, and in their eyes, they really are not deserving of life. So they'll definitely care. With the Chinese especially, they are just, oh my goodness, they are beyond the pale cruel. And in their treatment, they when they marched into the city of Nanking in China, this ends up being known in history as the rape of Nanking, because what they did to the population in that city is sickening. Mass rape, yes, that takes place for sure, but also just massive killing. And stories about Japanese soldiers throwing Chinese babies up in the air and catching them on their bayonets, and using living Chinese people for bayonet practice. Just all kinds of just absolutely cruelty for the sake of being cruel. Right? They also, with prisoners of war, mistreated them. Some American prisoners of war that they ended up with, they executed. Some they were pretty much on the way to starving them to death by the time they were liberated at the end of the war. Really, really, really ugly treatment. Okay. And the Japanese end up being attributed to causing about 2.5 million deaths due to their policies on this. That goes above and beyond deaths that actually were related to true fighting, true combat. Picture there on the other right side shows some Allied POWs when they're liberated. They're basically kind of almost like human skeletons at that point. All right. I guess we're gonna be taking the world view on this, and so some people do view some of the actions that the Allies took in World War II as crossing moral lines into the area of atrocity. And some examples I'll give you there: that bombing campaign that I talked to you about, that the United States and British carried out between both Japan and Germany. We knew we were targeting civilians. I mean, it was part of the strategy at that point. As I said, they were doing anything they could do to try to break the will of the enemy. But a very conscious decision was made at some point in the command structures of the Allies that this was to be done. And so you got the number there for how many civilians, people who did not wear a uniform and people who were not actively involved in the war effort, were just trying to live their lives back, in their towns and villages and in the cities, who ended up dying in these bombing campaigns. What else do we have here? 3 cities. I already mentioned Tokyo to you. In Germany, the cities of Hamburg and Dresden became examples of just how horrible these bombings could be. All of them ended up being victim of these firebombing campaigns, where, again, these incendiary bombs were dropped, whose purpose was to set as many fires as possible. And in all 3 of those examples, Dresden is the one I've read about before, that they talk about firestorms that broke out because the fire would kind of build up its own energy and would create more fire, and just tens of thousands of people who burned alive in these attacks. Okay, and like I said, to some people, that's if we call the enemy doing that an atrocity, then are we committing atrocity ourselves? And some of the American leaders said at the time, if we end up losing this war, we're going to be facing consequences for this, because in effect they were admitting, yeah, we're doing something here really evil. There are many people around the world, folks, to this very day, who say that the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was an atrocity. We wiped off, basically the face of the earth, two cities that were mainly made up of, again, non-combatant civilians. And the vast majority of those 140 that died, and really, like I said, more than that because of the lingering effects that killed many years later, the majority of them were non-combatants. And so, whichever you want to look at it. I mean, rest of his life, Truman was asked about it, and he never wavered. He always said, if I had to do it again, I would do it. I was going to, in his mind, he was saving not only American lives, but Japanese lives, because this prospect of massive suicides was, potentially, was prevented. Not to mention the massive loss of life that American military forces would have undertaken in trying to invade Japan. So, but on the surface, again, if you look at it from the other side, we're still to this day the only country in the world who has ever used nuclear atomic weaponry in a war setting, right? Really in any setting. Okay, so there you go with that. Before I jump into C, I should mention that there were trials that took place both in Europe and in Asia, and leaders of both the Nazis and the Japanese government were put on trial for crimes against humanity, and many of them were punished everything from death, execution to long prison terms. And so that there were consequences, legal consequences as well that took place as a result of this. Obviously, with us being the winners of the war, there were never any charges of crimes against humanity brought against us, the British, any of the Allies. Regardless of what tactics we used. Okay. And then never again, which was the mantra, especially of the Holocaust, that the world must make sure this never happens again. And I would love to be able to say that, boy, we learned some lessons from World War II, didn't we? No, we have not. And we have seen genocide events taking place. Matter of fact, folks, there are genocide events taking place right now as we speak. And in that regard, it's one of those, another sad examples that us humans are really, really slow to learn our lessons. Some examples I'll give you, though, that the College Board wants you to be aware of. In Bosnia, in 1990s, a war that breaks out that ends up involving NATO and American forces. What at the time, before Ukraine, was the largest kind of military outbreak of war since World War II. And involved in it was a lot of friction between Muslims and Christians down in the Balkan area, in that same kind of region where World War I got started. And there were proven incidences of what was called ethnic cleansing, which really is a kind of a euphemism for genocide, the rounding up of large numbers of Muslims, mainly men they seem to be going after, but there were others who, women and children that got involved in this as well, and Serbs that were, committing mass murder against Muslims before that fighting finally died down and things got somewhat under control. Definitely a genocide event. Okay, in Rwanda in 1994, again, some of those, long-term consequences of imperialism. I told you the story before. When the Belgians were running the colony, they gave a lot of privileges to one group, and the other group was kind of the grunt labor. And when they walked away in the 1960s, the group that had been discriminated and put in the secondary position was burning to get even. And it took a while for them to have their opportunity, but in 1994, they rose up. And by the time the killing ended in Rwanda, you had over 1 million dead, and I think way more than that fled the country. It was a massive, massive refugee crisis as well, as people tried to get out of the way of the slaughter that was going on there. So that is another one that you can look at there. Okay, the Sudan, I put 2003, but this is violence that has not ended to this very day, and civil war that's gone on there. That number is probably outdated that I have for you, but another one where there's been mass killing that's taken place, and also massive refugee crisis coming out of all of that. There have been accusations of genocide in both, the war in Ukraine. There have been accusations of genocide in Gaza. There have been accusations of genocide against Israelis. Go back to the October 7th attacks a couple of years ago that precipitated all the recent violence in Gaza. That was an atrocity event aimed at Israelis. So it continues on, and I'm sure there's some people that are going to, be pointing fingers and talking about some of the recent events going on in Iran and Lebanon, and leveling the genocide, potentially leveling the genocide word there as well. All right. But the three biggies I give you there, and those are the ones you're most likely, if you're going to face anything on the AP test, it's going to be those three. Okay. And these all happened in real time, and these all happened with, very modern media. The Sudan, Rwanda, we don't have, maybe not an internet world yet, but cable TV, this is not, we found out years later. What? No, these are all events that played out in real life, in real time, in front of the world. And, and there was a fairly quick response in Bosnia. Again, we're talking about, it's part of Europe. In Rwanda, as a lot of people would say, it's Africa, which always seems to get second-hand, third-hand treatment before anyone stepped in to try to stop that. A lot of killing, and the same of Sudan, another part, further up north and east of Africa, of Rwanda. It just seems to be in the end that I hope humanity isn't just making their peace with the fact that, well, I guess it's just the way it is. But unfortunately, that never again mantra really has not turned to be anything like never again. It just keeps happening over and over and over. All right. And that finally gets, yes, there we go. Yeah, I do feel like thunder or lightning has split my skull wide open. That is it, folks. That is the beast. It is over. Oh, my goodness. And really, this is the last of your major hurdles like this. Like I said, when we get back from break, Unit 8 and Unit 9 will go down a lot more easily. And so pat yourself on the back. You've gotten through the vast majority of the true pain and suffering that you had to deal with in this class. So there we go. All right. Well, what little time we have left before we're sitting down to test for this, we'll do in some shared review together. All right. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. I appreciate you. See ya.